A palace with 147 rooms, 45 bathrooms fitted with gold, 70 servants attending to every need, sold for just $160,000. Then demolished. How does a monument to wealth become worthless in a single generation? The wrecking ball swings through air thick with August heat. 1980. Windmore, Pennsylvania. The moment before impact stretches like a held breath, and then the iron sphere strikes marble with a sound that echoes across 300 acres of manicured grounds gone wild. The north facade of Whitemarsh Hall, which once gleamed in the sun like a palace transplanted from Versailles, crumbles. Dust rises in clouds that catch the light, turning golden, then grey, then settling on the rhododendrons that no one has pruned in 30 years. The demolition crew takes their lunch break in the shadow of what remains. They sit on chunks of carved limestone and unwrap sandwiches, their thermoses clicking against stone that cost more per square foot than most Americans earned in a year. One of them, a younger man with sunburned forearms, asks the foreman what this place was. The foreman shrugs. "Some rich person's house," he says. "Got too expensive to keep. Nobody wanted it, nobody wanted it. Stand in that rubble and ask the question that demands an answer. How does a structure that cost $3 million to build in 1916, a sum that would exceed $75 million in modern currency, end up sold for $160,000 6 decades later? How does a palace maintained by 70 servants become an inconvenience that no one will claim? The mathematics of it seem impossible. The tragedy of it seems inevitable. Picture what the wrecking crew is destroying. 147 rooms spread across 4 floors and 2 wings. 45 bathrooms, each fitted with fixtures ordered from Tiffany & Company, the faucets genuine gold, the marble imported from Italy, and veined like frozen rivers. A ballroom designed to hold 1,000 guests, its ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs, its floor inlaid with wood from 6 continents. An indoor swimming pool lined with tiles that shimmer like fish scales. A bowling alley, an elevator. Crystal chandeliers in every major room, each one heavy enough to kill a man if the chain broke. Servants' quarters that housed more people than lived in the average American town. The estate employed a full-time staff that operated like a military unit. Maids in black and white uniforms, footmen in livery, cooks and sous chefs and pastry specialists, gardeners who knew every plant by its Latin name, chauffeurs who maintained a fleet of automobiles, a head butler who ruled the household with absolute authority, second only to the lady of the house herself. 70 souls dedicated to maintaining the fantasy that one family could live like royalty in a republic. But walk through the rubble, and you see the truth that the palace could never admit. The broken toilets with their gold fixtures torn out by salvagers. The collapsed ceiling of the ballroom, its painted clouds now mixed with insulation and bird droppings. The swimming pool, long since drained, its bottom cracked and filled with leaves. The elevator shaft, a dark, vertical scar. The bowling alley, its lanes warped and splitting. Everything built to last forever, dying right on schedule. The question follows you through the destruction like a ghost. What happened? The answer lies not in the building, but in the people who built it, in the woman who demanded it, in the man who paid for it, in the society that briefly celebrated it before forgetting it entirely. Her name was Eva Roberts Cromwell Stotesbury, though that final surname was the one that mattered, the one she fought for, the one that came with the palace. They called her the Queen of Philadelphia Society, a title she wore like a crown and defended like a fortress. She was beautiful in the way that power makes people beautiful, her photographs showing a woman with careful eyes and a smile that revealed nothing. She dressed in silk and diamonds. She moved through rooms as if she owned not just the furniture, but the air itself. She did, for a time, own Philadelphia society. At her peak, an invitation to Whitemarsh Hall was a golden ticket that elevated the recipient and devastated those excluded. She hosted balls that made headlines. She entertained presidents and robber barons and European nobility. She proved that a woman born to Virginia gentry but widowed young could, with the right husband and the right house, become American aristocracy. The right husband was Edward Townsend Stotesbury, and he built her this palace for reasons that were both simple and complex. Love, certainly, but also ambition of a particular kind, the ambition of a man who has conquered every financial summit and finds that the view from the top is lonely. Edward had money. What he needed was belonging. What he bought was Whitemarsh Hall. The palace was never just a house. It was a weapon, a statement, a monument to the revolutionary idea that in America money could purchase anything, even acceptance among people who believed their blood made them superior. Edward and Eva tested that theory with millions of dollars and thousands of hours and the labor of craftsmen from 3 continents. They built their proof in marble and gold. For 2 decades, it seemed to work. Stand in the ruins and feel the weight of what that success cost. Not just the $3 million in construction, not just the staggering annual expense of heating 147 rooms through Pennsylvania winters, not just the salaries of 70 servants. The real cost was measured in a different currency entirely, in the years spent maintaining a facade, in the constant performance of wealth, in the exhausting work of being enviable. The demolition crew returns from lunch, and the wrecking ball swings again. Another section of the south wing collapses. The room where Eva once hosted 1,000 guests for a ball that everyone who attended remembered for the rest of their lives. Gone in seconds. The dust rises and settles, and the world continues as if nothing significant has happened. Because to the wrecking crew, nothing significant has happened. They are clearing land, removing an obsolete structure, making way for something new. They don't know about Eva's triumph, or Edward's fortune, or the 70 servants who once called this place their workplace. They don't know about the parties or the presidents, or the careful social calculations that went into every guest list. They just know this building is in the way. History is filled with palaces that outlasted their builders. The Taj Mahal still stands. Versailles still draws crowds. Blenheim Palace still houses descendants of the man who built it. But Whitemarsh Hall, less than 65 years after its completion, is being reduced to rubble because no one wanted to pay to maintain it. Because the very quality that made it magnificent, its scale, became the quality that made it impossible. The story of how that happened is not a simple story of financial ruin or bad luck or changing times. It is a story about the fundamental miscalculation at the heart of the American dream. The belief that anything money can buy is worth having. The confusion between price and value. The tragic error of building monuments to impress people whose opinions will not survive them. Watch the wrecking ball swing and understand what is being destroyed. Not just marble and gold, not just 147 rooms and 45 bathrooms. What is being destroyed is the evidence of a particular kind of American delusion, the kind that believes grandeur equals immortality. Eva and Edward are long dead. The society they conquered is scattered to history. The servants who maintained their palace are forgotten. But the lesson remains, written in rubble and dust, and the sound of marble crumbling under iron. Nothing built of stone can guarantee remembrance. No palace can purchase permanence. The only structures that survive are the ones built in hearts rather than earth. And those cannot be demolished, no matter how hard the world swings its wrecking ball. The foreman checks his watch. 3 more hours of work before sunset. By tomorrow, the east wing will be gone. By next week, nothing will remain but the foundation. By next month, even that will be covered. In a year, grass will grow where ballrooms stood. The land will be repurposed. A hospital, probably. Something useful. Something that serves the living rather than memorializing the dead. But first, we must understand what is being lost, not the building. Buildings fall. We must understand the people who believed this building would make them eternal. We must meet Edward Townsend Stotesbury, the man who thought $3 million could buy his way into history. We must understand where he came from, what he wanted, and why he believed a palace could give it to him. Because the tragedy of Whitemarsh Hall begins not with its demolition, but with its conception, in the mind of a man who had everything except the one thing he desired most. Edward Townsend Stotesbury began as a number, $16.60 per month. That was his salary in 1866 when he walked into the offices of Drexel and Company at age 17, a clerk among clerks, indistinguishable from dozens of other young men hoping to rise in Philadelphia's banking world. He was born to Quaker parents in 1849, the second son in a middle-class family that valued discipline over display. His mother named him after a prominent member of the Friends meeting. He attended public schools and Friends Central School, then studied at the newly established Pierce Business College. Nothing about his background suggested destiny. Nothing about his appearance commanded attention. He was small in stature, quick in movement, immaculate in dress. Unremarkable in every way except one. He kept his mouth shut and his ears open. This was his own explanation for success, delivered years later when reporters pressed him for the secret to accumulating a fortune estimated at $100 million. Keep your mouth shut and your ears open. It sounds like a platitude. It was actually a philosophy. While other ambitious young men schemed and networked and positioned themselves for advancement, Edward Stotesbury simply worked. He arrived early. He never missed a day. He kept meticulous records of every transaction, every penny, every detail that passed through his hands. The firm he joined was no ordinary banking house. Drexel and Company, founded by Francis Martin Drexel and directed by his son Anthony Joseph Drexel, had recently formed a partnership with a rising force in New York finance, a man named J. Pierpont Morgan. The alliance created Drexel, Morgan and Company, linking Philadelphia's industrial capital with New York's financial power. Young Stotesbury found himself working at the intersection of American wealth. He absorbed everything: the mechanics of corporate finance, the art of underwriting, the delicate negotiations required to reorganize failing railroads into profitable enterprises. In the late 19th century, America's railway system was expanding faster than its financial structure could support. Companies overextended. Investors panicked. Someone had to impose order on chaos. Drexel and Company, with Stotesbury learning the trade, led the way in railway reorganization. 16 years after starting as a clerk, in 1882, Edward Stotesbury became a partner. He was 33 years old. The promotion granted him direct participation in the firm's most lucrative deals, access to commissions from Morgan-led operations, and a seat at the table where American capitalism was being reshaped. When Anthony Drexel died in 1893, Stotesbury assumed leadership of the Philadelphia office while maintaining his partnership in J.P. Morgan and Company in New York. He was now one of the most powerful financiers in America. He helped create United States Steel Corporation. He facilitated the International Chinese Loan of 1909. He served as chairman of the Reading Railroad. His name appeared on the boards of insurance companies, steel manufacturers, paper producers. J.P. Morgan himself called Stotesbury the man who knew more about the banking business than anyone in America. Yet for all his financial conquest, Edward Stotesbury remained a stranger in his own city. Philadelphia society operated according to rules that predated the Revolution. The families who controlled its social institutions descended from colonial merchants and signers of the Declaration. They belonged to clubs that Edward could not join. They attended balls to which he was not invited. They married among themselves and viewed finance men, regardless of wealth, as vulgar newcomers who smelled of new money and ambition. Edward's first wife, Frances Berman Butcher, died in 1881, giving birth to their third daughter. She was 31 years old. He raised his surviving daughters alone, remaining a widower for 30 years. His life became his work. He accumulated millions while living modestly by the standards of his wealth. He joined the Bachelor's Barge Club at age 38, not because he rowed, but because he hoped membership might open social doors. It didn't. Philadelphia society was a fortress with gates that money alone could not open. Edward Stotesbury controlled billions in assets. He reorganized industries. Presidents consulted him. Yet he could not secure what mattered most in the city where he had been born and raised. He could not secure acceptance. Then, in 1912, at age 60, Edward met Eva Roberts Cromwell. She was a beautiful widow, 37 years old, with Virginia lineage and impeccable social credentials. More importantly, she understood the world that excluded him. She knew its hierarchies and vanities. She knew how to navigate its treacherous waters. She knew that in Philadelphia, the right marriage could accomplish what the right banking deal could not. On January 18, 1912, they married at his townhouse on Walnut Street. J.P. Morgan attended. So did President Taft. The wedding itself was a statement, but Eva understood it was merely the opening move. She needed a stage. She needed a palace. She needed Whitemarsh Hall. Edward, who had spent 3 decades accumulating $100 million through careful calculation and conservative banking principles, looked at his new wife and made a decision that contradicted every financial instinct he possessed. He would build her whatever she wanted. Any cost, any scale, any extravagance. He would prove that money, if spent lavishly enough, could purchase the impossible. He was about to spend $3 million testing that theory. The tragedy was already in motion. He just didn't know it yet. Eva Roberts was born Lucretia Bishop Roberts in Chicago in 1865, though she abandoned that cumbersome first name early. She came from respectable stock, her father James Roberts, a man of business, her mother Eleanor, a woman who understood the social hierarchies that money alone could not purchase. Eva learned early that in America, the right connections mattered as much as the right bank account. Her first husband, Oliver Eaton Cromwell, gave her 3 children and social credentials before dying in 1909. She was 44 years old, still beautiful, suddenly widowed, and possessed of something rare. She understood both worlds. She knew poverty's anxieties and wealth's possibilities. She knew how society worked, its unspoken rules and invisible hierarchies. When she met Edward Stotesbury on a cruise in 1912, she saw opportunity in his loneliness. He saw salvation in her sophistication. They married on January 18th at his townhouse on Walnut Street. President Taft attended. So did J.P. Morgan himself. But Eva understood the wedding was merely the beginning. Philadelphia society would not surrender simply because a widowed finance man married a woman with Virginia ancestry. She needed a stage worthy of her ambitions. She needed Whitemarsh Hall. The townhouse where they married, twin buildings at 1923 and 1925 Walnut Street, was respectable but insufficient. Eva wanted something unprecedented. She wanted a palace that would force Philadelphia's old families to acknowledge her, to seek invitations from her, to bow before her social supremacy. Edward, who had spent decades accumulating $100 million through conservative banking principles, looked at his new wife's ambitions and made a decision that contradicted every financial instinct. He would build her anything she wanted. In 1916, construction began on 300 acres in Windmore, just north of Philadelphia's boundary in Springfield Township. Eva selected the architect herself. Horace Trumbauer was Philadelphia's premier designer of grand estates, the man who had built Linwood Hall for Peter Widener. Trumbauer understood scale. He understood how to make stone speak of permanence and power. He understood, most importantly, how to create American versions of European palaces. Eva moved into a house adjacent to the construction site. Every day she walked the grounds, consulting with Trumbauer, approving plans, changing details. The gardens would be designed by Jacques Greber, the French landscape architect who had created Versailles-inspired grounds for Widener. Nothing would be modest. Nothing would be restrained. This palace would announce that Eva Stotesbury was not merely wealthy. She was royal. The design took form: 147 rooms across 6 stories, 3 of them underground. 45 bathrooms, each fitted with fixtures from Tiffany & Company, the faucets plated in gold, a ballroom measuring 64 feet in length, capable of holding 1,000 guests, an indoor swimming pool, a gymnasium, a private movie theater, a refrigerating plant, 50-foot limestone columns at the entrance, 100,000 square feet of space organized in a U-shaped Georgian revival mansion inspired by English country houses and French chateaux. The cost began at $3 million and climbed steadily. Edward never questioned it. This was not an expense. This was an investment in the impossible, an attempt to purchase with stone and gold what his banking genius could not secure: acceptance, belonging. A place in Philadelphia society that his decades of financial success had been unable to earn. World War I delayed completion. Materials from Europe, trapped by conflict, could not arrive. The exterior stood mostly finished by 1918, but the interior decorations and furnishings required years more. Eva waited, maintaining her adjacent residence, supervising every detail. The gardens took shape under Greber's direction. Formal French parterres, English informal landscapes, 4 large greenhouses for trees and ferns. Smaller greenhouses dedicated solely to growing flowers for the constant parties Eva planned to host. More than 70 gardeners would be required to maintain the grounds alone. Inside, 40 servants would staff the mansion. Butlers and footmen and maids in uniform. Cooks and sous chefs, valets and ladies' maids. Chauffeurs for the automobile fleet. A head butler who would rule the household staff with military precision. Many of these servants would follow the Stotesburys to their other estates: El Mirasol in Palm Beach for winters, Wingwood House in Bar Harbor for summers. The palace required an army simply to function. Finally, in 1921, Whitemarsh Hall opened. 5 years of construction, $3 million spent, 147 rooms ready to receive guests. Eva stood in the completed ballroom and understood that the real work was just beginning. Building the palace was the easy part. Making it matter required something more difficult. It required transforming Philadelphia society itself, bending its ancient hierarchies to acknowledge her supremacy. She had the weapon. Now she needed to deploy it. The parties began almost immediately, and for 2 decades, Whitemarsh Hall blazed with light and laughter and the sound of Eva Stotesbury winning the war she had married Edward to fight. Walk through the completed palace and understand what $3 million purchased. Not just rooms, but worlds within worlds, each space a statement, each detail a declaration of wealth so absolute it approached the absurd. The exterior announced itself from a mile away. Visitors approached along a private drive that wound through Jacques Greber's formal gardens, past fountains and statuary imported from Italy, through groves and across lawns maintained by 70 gardeners. The house itself rose in U-shaped Georgian splendor, its Indiana limestone facade so bright it seemed to glow. 50-foot columns framed the entrance, each one carved from a single piece of stone, each one weighing more than most families earned in a lifetime. 6 stories, though only 3 visible from outside. The architect had hidden 3 floors underground and concealed the top floor of 39 rooms behind a high balustrade. creating the illusion of modest proportions while housing 147 rooms across 100,000 square feet. It was larger than the White House. It was, by some measurements, the third largest private residence ever built in America. Step through the entrance and the scale overwhelmed. The principal reception rooms rose 25 feet high, their ceilings worked in gilt and plaster, their walls paneled in carved wood shipped from England. 5 grand staircases connected the floors, each one wide enough for 3 people to walk abreast. 3 elevators served those who preferred not to climb. The telephone system required its own operators working at a dedicated switchboard. The entire estate ran on its own generator, independent of Philadelphia's electrical grid. 24 fireplaces warmed the mansion, though calling them fireplaces diminishes what they were. In the ballroom, a marble mantel imported from Italy commanded $60,000, a sum that would have purchased several comfortable houses in Philadelphia. The ballroom itself stretched 64 feet, capable of holding 1,000 guests beneath a ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs. Crystal chandeliers from Europe, each one weighing hundreds of pounds, hung in every major room. The organ dominated 3 stories. An Aeolian pipe organ with 3 manuals, its pipes rising through dedicated chambers, powerful enough to be heard throughout the mansion. Ava loved organ music. During afternoons and evenings when guests filled the house, the organ played continuously, its sound filling hallways and drifting through open doors, mixing with conversation and laughter. 45 bathrooms, many with heated floors, bronze dolphin faucets, gold-plated fixtures ordered from Tiffany, 5-foot by 10-foot gilt mirrors watching over the staircases, marble statues from Tiesto from Italy stationed in hallways like silent sentries, tapestries from France covering walls, paintings collected by Edward over decades. His European 18th century portrait collection ranked among the top 3 in America. An indoor swimming pool styled as a Roman bath, a gymnasium, squash courts and tennis courts, a movie theater, a barbershop, a tailor's room, a bakery, a room devoted solely to making cookies, a wine cellar that openly flouted prohibition, stocked with vintages that would outlast the law, forbidding them, a refrigerating plant, a games room with a billiards table and, improbably, a slot machine. The servants' quarters occupied more than 30 rooms. The staff lived in a parallel universe within the palace, their movements choreographed to remain invisible to guests. Butlers and footmen in livery, maids in black uniforms with white aprons, cooks and sous chefs and pastry specialists working in kitchens as large as most restaurants, valets and ladies' maids attending to personal needs, chauffeurs maintaining the automobile fleet, all overseen by a head butler who commanded the household with military precision. Eva's son from her first marriage, James Cromwell, kept his own residence on the estate. Her daughter Louise visited frequently. The palace was designed to accommodate not just the Stotesburys, but an entire extended family, plus guests, plus the small army required to maintain it all. The grounds themselves were masterpieces. 4 large greenhouses for trees and ferns. Smaller greenhouses dedicated to growing flowers for the constant arrangements needed in a palace that size. Formal French parterres laid out with mathematical precision. English informal landscapes designed to appear natural while requiring constant maintenance. Fountains, statuary, walkways, gardens within gardens, each one a separate world. Running this operation cost $1 million per year. Every year, just to maintain what already existed. The fuel bills alone staggered. Heating 147 rooms through Pennsylvania winters, cooling them in summer, lighting them year-round, feeding 70 gardeners and 40 household servants, maintaining the automobiles, replacing worn furnishings, repairing weather damage, refreshing flowers, stocking the wine cellar, purchasing food for parties that regularly hosted 600 guests. $1 million per year to maintain a house where 2 people actually lived. In 1921, when Whitemarsh Hall officially opened, Edward Stotesbury was 72 years old. Eva was 56. They had built this palace to prove something, to force Philadelphia society to acknowledge them, to create a stage where Eva could reign as the queen she believed herself to be. The palace was complete. The stage was set. The Golden Age was about to begin. For exactly 2 decades, Whitemarsh Hall would blaze with life and light and laughter. Then, like everything built of stone and gold and human ambition, it would begin its long descent into silence. The lights blazed every weekend through the 1920s. 800 guests for a christening ball, 600 for garden parties under floodlights, full orchestras in the ballroom, the organ's music drifting through 147 rooms. Eva Stotesbury had her stage, and she performed her role with relentless precision. She hosted annual debutante balls that determined which young women would enter Philadelphia society. An invitation to present. Your daughter at Whitemarsh Hall meant acceptance. Exclusion meant social death. Eva wielded this power like a scepter, deciding futures with a stroke of her pen. The daughters of old families who had once snubbed her now competed desperately for her approval. The guest lists read like directories of American power: industrialists, bankers, politicians, even royalty. Crown Prince Gustav Adolf of Sweden, who would become King Gustav VI, attended the 1921 christening ball for Eva's grandchildren. Marshal Joseph Joffre, hero of France, walked through gardens that reminded him of Versailles. Former French Premier Georges Clemenceau visited and made the comparison explicit, declaring that Whitemarsh rivaled the palace of Louis XIV. After that comment, newspapers began calling it the American Versailles. Eva loved the nickname. She had earned it. Henry Ford visited once. He walked through the mansion, examining everything with his manufacturer's eye, calculating costs and efficiency. When he left, he told reporters it was a great experience to see how the rich live. Coming from Ford, one of America's wealthiest men, the comment carried weight. If Ford was impressed, Whitemarsh must truly be extraordinary. The parties followed elaborate choreography. Guests received personalized stationery with embossed invitations. Chauffeurs collected them from Philadelphia in the Stotesbury automobile fleet. Upon arrival, footmen in livery guided them through reception rooms where conversation mixed with organ music. Dinner might feature 8 courses prepared by French chefs. Dancing followed in the ballroom under crystal chandeliers, 4 orchestras rotating to ensure continuous music. Gardens illuminated by electric floodlights allowed midnight strolls through landscapes designed to rival European estates. Eva commanded these events like a general directing campaigns. Every detail received her personal attention. Which flowers in which rooms, which wines with which courses, who sat beside whom at dinner, the strategic placement of guests to facilitate beneficial connections or to subtly punish those who had offended her. She understood that these parties were not entertainment, but warfare conducted with champagne and crystal. Edward watched from the edges of these gatherings, aging now, his small frame growing frailer. He had paid for this. $3 million for the palace, $1 million per year to maintain it. Countless additional millions for the parties, the automobiles, the 3 other estates. El Mirasol in Palm Beach for winters, Wingwood House in Bar Harbor for summers, the renovated townhouses on Walnut Street. He moved between these palaces with Eva and their traveling staff, a monarch without a country, purchasing acceptance one party at a time. For those years, it worked. Philadelphia society surrendered. The families who had excluded Edward for decades now sought his wife's favor. Eva Roberts Cromwell Stotesbury became Philadelphia's undisputed social queen. Her title was not honorary. She ruled absolutely over who belonged and who didn't, who mattered and who was invisible. She had conquered the fortress that had repelled Edward for 30 years. But conquest is not the same as belonging. The old families attended her parties because Exclusion would have been humiliating. They sought her invitations because she had made refusal impossible. Yet privately, they still considered her a woman who had married money, and Edward a banker who had bought his way into rooms where he didn't naturally belong. They came to Whitemarsh Hall. They drank his champagne and ate his food and danced in his ballroom. They never quite forgot that it was all purchased rather than inherited. Eva either didn't notice or didn't care. She had what she wanted: the palace, the parties, the power. Every weekend brought fresh gatherings. Every season brought new opportunities to display her supremacy. The organ played, the chandeliers glittered, the gardens bloomed under the 70 gardeners' constant attention. The 40 household servants moved invisibly, maintaining the machinery of magnificence. This was the golden age of Whitemarsh Hall. From 1921 through 1929, the palace functioned exactly as designed. A stage for Eva's triumph, a monument to Edward's willingness to pay any price for acceptance. A symbol that, in America, money could purchase anything, even a throne in a city that pretended not to recognize thrones. Then the stock market crashed in October 1929, and the world that supported such extravagance began to crumble. The parties continued, but less frequently. The lights still blazed, but not every weekend. The Depression arrived, and suddenly Whitemarsh Hall seemed less like a palace and more like an obscenity. The golden age was ending. Eva just didn't know it yet. Neither did Edward, who at 80 years old still believed he had purchased permanence. The bills kept arriving. 1 million per year, every year. The cost never stopped, even when the parties did. The Depression arrived in October 1929, and with it came the slow recognition that even Morgan fortunes were not infinite. The stock market collapsed. Banks failed. Breadlines formed in cities across America. At Whitemarsh Hall, the lights still blazed for parties, but less frequently now. The organ still played, but the music sounded different in a world where millions had lost everything. Edward Townsend Stotesbury was 80 years old in 1929. His fortune, estimated at $100 million in 1927, began its long erosion. Not through the crash alone, though that took its toll. The greater damage came from the cost of maintaining 3 palaces through an economic catastrophe. Whitemarsh Hall required $1 million annually just for operations. Fuel for heating 147 rooms, salaries for 70 servants, maintenance, repairs, taxes. The expenses never stopped, even when the parties did. He withdrew $55 million from his J.P. Morgan account between 1933 and his death. More than $10 million per year, bleeding out to maintain estates that were becoming increasingly difficult to justify. Not just financially difficult, morally difficult. How do you host a ball for 600 guests when people are starving? How do you maintain 70 gardeners when unemployment approaches 25%? Eva continued entertaining, but the guest lists grew shorter. The Depression made palace living seem obscene. Newspapers that once celebrated Whitemarsh's magnificence now published photographs that highlighted its excess. The mood of the country had shifted. Wealth was no longer admirable. It was suspect. The very qualities that had made the Stotesburys fascinating in the 1920s made them embarrassing in the 1930s. Edward grew frailer. On May 16, 1938, at age 89, he went to his office at Drexel and Company as usual. He attended a meeting at the Reading Railroad, where he remained chairman of the executive committee. That afternoon, he was stricken on his way home to Whitemarsh Hall. He died that evening, apparently of a heart attack, in the palace he had built to prove something that now seemed tragically irrelevant. The probate inventory revealed the truth 2 years later. His estate was valued at $4 million, from $100 million to $4 million in 11 years. If he had lived another 2 years, financial observers noted, he would have been completely broke with 3 unmarketable palaces on his hands. He had been on a financial suicide course, spending himself into oblivion, maintaining monuments that the world no longer valued. Eva discovered the full horror after his death. Edward had left her lifetime use of Whitemarsh Hall, but the income from his estate trust was only about 1/4 of what the palace cost to maintain. The mathematics were impossible. She could have the house, but not the means to live in it. She could keep her title as queen, but the kingdom was bankrupt. She moved out almost immediately. The decision must have devastated her. 20 years of parties, 20 years of reigning over Philadelphia society, 20 years of proving that she belonged, all of it ending in practical financial calculation. She could not afford to stay in the monument Edward had built for her. The staff received their dismissals. 40 household servants who had followed Eva through the seasons from palace to palace for nearly 2 decades. They had served at Whitemarsh in spring and fall, at Wingwood House in Bar Harbor for summers, at El Mirasol in Palm Beach for winters. Now they were told to leave. The Queen was abdicating not by choice, but by necessity. Eva tried to sell the Stotesbury collection of English portraits, accumulated over decades by Edward, and considered one of the finest in America. The fine furniture, the tapestries, the porcelains. She realized less than 10 cents on the dollar. Depression prices. Nobody wanted treasures when they needed bread. The art collection received such petty offers that Eva donated it to a museum rather than accept the insult of selling masterpieces for pennies. She retreated to Washington and then to El Mirasol, the Palm Beach estate that remained in her name. She still had wealth. Technically, she still had social position. But Whitemarsh Hall stood empty, its 147 rooms ambient, its ballroom dark, its organ mute. The palace that had cost $3 million to build and $1 million per year to maintain became a burden that no one wanted to shoulder. Eva lived 8 more years, dividing time between Palm Beach and smaller residences, entertaining less frequently. Her parties smaller and quieter. She died at El Mirasol on May 31st, 1946, at age 80. The Queen of Philadelphia society passed away in Florida, far from the palace where she had reigned. Her obituaries noted her social prominence, her famous parties, her magnificent estates. They did not mention what should have been obvious by then, that the entire structure had been built on sand, that $3 million and 147 rooms could not guarantee permanence. That acceptance purchased with wealth was only as stable as the fortune supporting it. Edward and Eva had spent decades and countless millions proving they belonged. They had built 3 palaces. They had hosted presidents and royalty. They had forced Philadelphia society to acknowledge them. And when they died, their palaces became problems that their heirs desperately wanted to solve by any means necessary. Whitemarsh Hall stood empty, waiting for someone to decide its fate. The decision, when it came, would be swift and final. Eva's heirs wanted nothing to do with Whitemarsh Hall. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The palace required $1 million annually just to keep functioning. The trust Edward left provided nowhere near that amount. Selling it was the only option that made financial sense. They tried. For years they tried. Eva had already listed the property before her death in 1946. No buyers materialized. Who needed 147 rooms in post-war America? The very qualities that made Whitemarsh magnificent made it unmarketable. Too large, too expensive, too specific to the tastes of people who no longer existed. The rich were building different houses now, smaller, more modern, more efficient. The era of palaces staffed by armies of servants was ending. Labor was expensive. Fuel was expensive. Everything was expensive. Maintaining Whitemarsh would require not just wealth, but the kind of absolute fortune that was becoming increasingly rare in an America shaped by progressive taxation and Depression-era reforms. Institutions examined the property. Could it become a school? The operating costs were prohibitive. A hospital? The layout was all wrong, designed for entertaining rather than patient care. A museum? Who would pay the heating bills alone? One by one, potential buyers calculated the numbers and walked away. During World War II, the empty mansion found temporary purpose. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, fearing German bombardment of Manhattan, relocated thousands of artworks to Whitemarsh Hall for safekeeping. Paintings and sculptures that once hung in New York galleries now filled rooms where Eva had hosted presidents. The palace became a warehouse, its ballroom stacked with crated treasures, its elegance hidden behind protective wrapping. After the war ended, the art returned to New York. Whitemarsh stood empty again, waiting for someone to solve the impossible equation of its existence. In 1943, the Pennsylvania Salt Manufacturing Company purchased the estate for $167,000. Not the $160,000 mentioned in some accounts, but close enough that the number carries the same shock. A palace that cost $3 million to build, perhaps $10 million with furnishings, sold for $167,000, less than 6% of construction costs alone. The land was worth more than the building sitting on it. The salt company promised to maintain the formal gardens. They converted the mansion into a research laboratory, filling rooms designed for waltzing with chemical equipment and testing stations. Scientists worked where society matrons once gossiped. The organ fell silent. The ballroom became storage. The swimming pool remained empty. For 17 years, Whitemarsh served as corporate office space, its grandeur irrelevant to its new purpose. Nobody cared about the gilt mirrors or the marble statues or the crystal chandeliers. They needed lab benches and ventilation systems and parking for employees. In 1963, Pennsylvania Salt moved to a new facility. They abandoned Whitemarsh Hall without ceremony. The building they had promised to cherish stood vacant once more, this time with no prospects and no purpose. The land around it had already been sold to developers who built modest single-family homes, suburban housing for the post-war boom. California-style bungalows surrounded the mansion like ordinary citizens pressing against palace walls. For another 2 decades, Whitemarsh Hall sat empty. Vandals broke in. Drug dealers used it. Curious teenagers explored rooms where crown princes once danced. The palace that no one wanted became the palace that everyone forgot, waiting for the final solution that seemed inevitable from the moment Edward died. Before the wrecking ball could swing, everything inside had to go. The palace that Edward built and Eva ruled would be stripped piece by piece, its contents sold to anyone willing to pay. The auction drew crowds. Hundreds of people wandered through Whitemarsh Hall in its final days, walking rooms where presidents once danced, climbing staircases where servants once hurried invisibly. Most had never been inside before. The palace that symbolized exclusivity now opened its doors to everyone with curiosity and a few dollars to spend. They came to buy history. Tiffany light fixtures went for hundreds of dollars, not thousands. The gold-plated bathroom fittings that once symbolized obscene wealth sold for modest sums. Crystal chandeliers descended from their 25-foot-high ceilings, crated and carried away by buyers who saw not heritage, but decoration. Carved wooden mantels, including the Italian marble masterpiece from the ballroom that cost $60,000, were dismantled and sold. The furniture scattered across Pennsylvania and beyond. Antiques sourced from England and France by Joseph Duveen, pieces that had been selected specifically to fill these rooms, departed to homes where their provenance would be forgotten within a generation. The 5-foot by 10-foot gilt mirrors came down from the staircases. The marble statues from Italy were loaded onto trucks. The tapestries rolled up. The paintings carefully packed. One buyer purchased a limestone column simply because he found it beautiful. He didn't know which room it came from or what it had witnessed. He just liked the way it looked. Most buyers approached the auction with similar innocence. They were purchasing materials, not memories. The past held no value for people who hadn't lived it. Walk through the stripped mansion and understand what was being lost. Not just objects, but context. Each piece had been selected to function as part of a complete vision. The chandeliers were chosen to complement specific ceiling heights. The mantels matched particular room proportions. The furniture created conversation groupings for parties that would never happen again. Separated and sold individually, they became merely expensive things rather than elements of a unified artistic statement. The organ was dismantled, its pipes removed from the 3-story chamber where Eva had loved hearing it played continuously during afternoon and evening gatherings. The bronze dolphin faucets unscrewed from bathrooms. The slot machine from the games room carried away. The movie theater seats removed. The gymnasium equipment sold. Every removable element was removed. What remained was architecture. 147 empty rooms with stripped walls and bare floors. The limestone exterior, the 50-foot columns, the grand staircases leading nowhere useful. The structure itself, which nobody wanted because structure alone was worthless without the means to maintain it. The auction raised far less than the contents were worth, though far more than Eva's heirs expected. Depression-era prices had evolved into post-war bargains. A generation that had survived economic collapse and global war had little interest in Gilded Age excess. They wanted modest suburban homes, not palaces requiring armies of servants. The buyers left carrying pieces of White Marsh Hall. The palace was being dismembered before it would be destroyed. Soon, nothing would remain but photographs and memories, and the lesson that some purchases cannot be resold at any price. The wrecking ball was already scheduled. The date was set. White Marsh Hall had months left to exist. In 1976, developer J. Gross purchased the stripped mansion and 46 remaining acres. He envisioned townhouses, 183 modern units replacing Eva's palace. First, though, the mansion had to disappear. Disputes over zoning delayed demolition for years. Neighbors debated density. Developers argued about apartment towers versus townhouses. White Marsh Hall stood through these arguments, vandalized and deteriorating, a problem everyone wanted solved but no one wanted to address. The decision came finally in 1980. The wrecking crews arrived. What took 5 years to build would take months to destroy. The demolition drew spectators. People came to watch the end of an era, cameras in hand, documenting the destruction of what had been called the American Versailles. Photographers captured the wrecking ball striking 50-foot limestone columns. The moment of impact, the cloud of dust, the slow collapse of facades that had proclaimed permanence. The Indiana limestone exterior, once so bright it seemed to glow, fractured under iron. Walls 25 feet high crumbled. The ballroom where 1,000 guests had danced beneath painted clouds collapsed into rubble. The organ chamber, rising 3 stories, caved inward. The swimming pool, already drained and cracked, was filled with debris from upper floors. The gymnasium, the movie theater, the telephone switchboard room, the refrigerating plant, all reduced to broken stone and twisted metal. Room by room, the palace disappeared. The 45 bathrooms with their bronze dolphin faucets and gold fixtures, already stripped during the auction, became piles of shattered marble and broken tile. The grand staircases, 5 of them connecting 6 floors, collapsed level by level. The 3 elevators, their shafts now exposed to sky, filled with rubble. The servant quarters, more than 30 rooms where invisible hands had maintained the machinery of magnificence, crushed under machinery of a different purpose. The gardens Jacques Greber designed went next. The formal French parterres, maintained for decades by 70 gardeners, bulldozed. The fountains toppled. The statuary, what remained after the auction, pushed aside or buried. the 4 large greenhouses that grew trees and ferns. The smaller greenhouses that provided endless flowers for Eva's parties, all demolished to clear space for suburban housing. Neighbors watched from homes built on land that once belonged to the estate. California-style bungalows and modest single-family houses surrounded the destruction site. They had lived for years adjacent to the abandoned palace, complaining about the vandals and drug dealers who used it, the danger it posed to curious children, the eyesore it represented. Now they watched its destruction with mixed feelings: relief that the problem was being solved, sadness that such magnificence was ending this way. Architectural historians and preservationists reacted with outrage. The demolition photographs became symbols of loss, evidence of America's casual attitude toward its own history. This was the 3rd largest private residence in the United States. This was a Horace Trumbauer masterpiece designed by one of the Gilded Age's premier architects. This was a tangible link to an era of unrestrained ambition and artistic achievement. And it was being pulverized to make way for townhouses. But what choice existed? Who would maintain it? The costs were staggering. Heating alone required fortune. The structural repairs after decades of neglect would cost millions. Converting it to institutional use meant gutting interiors designed as unified works of art. The mathematics were impossible. The palace had become unsustainable the moment Edward died, and the trust proved insufficient. Everything since then was merely delayed inevitability. The demolition workers wore commemorative shirts afterward, a wrecking ball striking columns printed on fabric, a trophy for destroying what others had built. Some felt proud of efficient work completing a difficult job. Others sensed they had participated in something tragic, though precisely what tragedy remained unclear. They had demolished a building. Buildings fall every day. Why did this one matter? J. Gross made a decision during demolition. He would leave remnants. The 50-foot columns from the main portico, 6 of them, would remain standing as tribute. The belvedere at the back. Some statuary. Pieces of the lower garden wall. These fragments would remind future residents that Whitemarsh Hall once stood here, that something grand preceded their ordinary townhouses. The foundations and basements were not removed. Too expensive. Too difficult. Instead, they were backfilled, buried under dirt and grass. The palace's bones remained beneath the suburban, invisible support for a suburban development named, with unconscious irony, Stotesbury Estates. By late 1980, the demolition was complete. Where 147 rooms once stood, where Eva reigned and Edward paid bills, where 70 servants labored and presidents visited, there was nothing but cleared land and a few preserved columns standing like tombstones marking a grave. The townhouses rose quickly. 183 units, each one modest and modern, designed for middle-class families seeking affordable housing near Philadelphia. They were everything Whitemarsh Hall was not. Small, efficient, cheap to heat, easy to maintain. They required no servants, no armies of gardeners, no millions, dollars annually just to exist. The residents who moved into Stotesbury Estates walked past the preserved columns without much thought. Some knew vaguely that a mansion once stood here. Most didn't care. They had homes to furnish and children to raise and jobs to attend. The past was irrelevant compared to the present. The 6 50-foot columns stood in a small park, surrounded by townhouses, monuments to nothing that anyone living remembered. Eva and Edward were long dead. The parties were forgotten. The guests had aged and died themselves. Philadelphia society had moved on to new queens and new palaces, then moved on from caring about queens and palaces altogether. Whitemarsh Hall was gone. Its lesson remained, carved not in stone but in the rubble beneath suburban lawns. Today, if you drive along Willow Grove Avenue in Windmore, Pennsylvania, you might notice 6 50-foot limestone columns standing in a small park surrounded by townhouses. They seem absurdly out of place, monuments to nothing, relics from a vanished world. Most residents of Stotesbury Estates drive past them daily without thought. Some don't even know what they represent. The columns once supported the main portico of Whitemarsh Hall. Now they support nothing but memory, and memory fades quickly when no one living experienced what is being remembered. The townhouses that replaced Eva's palace are ordinary in every way. 183 units built by developer J. Gross, starting in 1980. Middle-class housing for middle-class families. Each unit modest and efficient, designed to be affordable and easy to maintain. They require no servants, no million-dollar annual budgets, no armies of gardeners. They are everything Whitemarsh Hall was not, and in being so, they prove the palace's fundamental miscalculation. No homes occupy the footprint where the mansion itself stood. The foundations and basements remain, backfilled with dirt rather than removed. Too expensive to excavate. Too difficult to access. The palace's bones rest beneath grass and soil, invisible support for a suburban development that bears the Stotesbury name without understanding what that name once meant. Scattered fragments survive alongside the 6 columns. A fountain. Several statues positioned at the roundabout on Claridge and Widener roads. Pieces of the lower garden wall from Jacques Graeber's formal parterres. The belvedere from the back of the house. Stairs leading nowhere. The twin pillars of the estate's main gate, 1 mile from where the mansion stood, still standing on Douglas Road minus their steel gates. The gatehouse behind those pillars, converted now to a private residence, occupied by people living inside what was once merely the entrance to someone else's grandeur. Streets in the area carry names that hint at the history. Trumbauer Drive for the architect. Cromwell Road for Eva's first married name. Stotesbury Avenue. The names remain after the reasons for the names have been forgotten. Most residents don't know who Trumbauer was or why Cromwell matters. They just know their address. The Philadelphia Museum of Art houses some of Whitemarsh's contents. Eva donated pieces after Edward's death, rather than accept insulting offers from Depression-era buyers. The Clodion plasterwork from the rotundas. Stone statuary. A magnificent marble statue that once belonged to King Frederick the Great of Prussia. Visitors walk past these pieces without knowing their origin. The museum labels identify them as 18th century European art. They don't mention they once stood in a Pennsylvania palace built by a banker desperate for acceptance. This is what remains of $3 million in construction costs and decades of million-dollar annual maintenance. 6 columns, some statuary, a few donated artworks, street names. The rest vanished as if it never existed, which in a meaningful sense it never did. Buildings exist, parties happen, but meaning requires something more than marble and gold. It requires connection that survives the people who created it. Edward Townsend Stotesbury spent his entire adult life accumulating $100 million through careful calculation and conservative banking. Then he spent himself into near bankruptcy, maintaining palaces designed to prove he belonged somewhere. He died believing he had purchased permanence. Within 42 years of his death, his grandest achievement was demolished to make way for townhouses. Eva Roberts Cromwell Stotesbury achieved her title. Queen of Philadelphia Society. For 2 decades, she reigned absolutely over who mattered and who didn't in the city that had excluded her husband for 30 years. She forced acceptance through the sheer magnitude of her palace and the strategic deployment of her parties. Then she died, and the palace became a problem her heirs solved by selling it for $167,000 to a salt manufacturing company. The tragedy isn't that Whitemarsh Hall was demolished. Buildings fall. The tragedy is that it was built in the first place, not as a home, but as proof of worthiness to people whose approval meant nothing beyond the moment it was given. Edward and Eva mistook attendance at their parties for genuine connection. They confused Philadelphia society's presence in their ballroom with actual belonging. They built monuments to impress people who came for the champagne, not for the hosts. The greatest palace cannot purchase what can only be given freely. Acceptance built on wealth is only as stable as the fortune supporting it. When Edward died and the money proved insufficient to maintain the machinery of magnificence, the acceptance evaporated immediately. The old families stopped coming. The invitations stopped mattering. The Queen abdicated not by choice, but by bankruptcy. Stone crumbles, gold tarnishes, status fades, crystal shatters, gardens return to wilderness. Only what we build in human hearts remains after we're gone, and that cannot be built with money, no matter how much we spend. 6 limestone columns stand in Windmore, Pennsylvania, supporting nothing but the weight of this lesson. Most people drive past without noticing. Those who notice don't understand what they're seeing. And perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps the most honest monument to Edward and Eva's ambition is not 6 preserved columns, but their complete irrelevance to the people living among them. The palace that cost $3 million to build and sold for $167,000 is gone. The lesson remains, waiting for the next person who believes monuments guarantee immortality, who confuses scale with significance, who thinks acceptance can be purchased rather than earned through the quiet accumulation of genuine human connection. Whitemarsh Hall stood for 59 years. Its lesson will stand as long as people build palaces to prove they matter to people who don't care. If this story of ambition, grandeur, and inevitable loss moved you, hit that like button. And if you want to explore more forgotten palaces and the people who built them, subscribe. Because history is filled with monuments that became rubble, and every single one has something to teach us about what actually lasts.